My name is Deanna Whitfield. I'm 43 years old, and on a Tuesday morning in October, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea that had gone cold, opened my phone, and canceled 2 credit cards that had my name on them. I didn't call anyone first. I didn't send a warning text. I didn't draft a long message explaining myself. I just opened the app, navigated to each account, and hit confirm twice. And then I put my phone face down on the table and finished getting ready for work. The cards stopped working at 7:14 in the morning. By 7:51, my brother Roy was calling. I let it go to voicemail. I let the second one go too. And when my mother called at 8:09, I stood in my bathroom looking at my own reflection in the mirror for a moment. Not crying, not smiling, just looking. And I let that one go too. I had a quarterly forecasting meeting at 9 o'clock. I ran it the way I always run my meetings. Prepared, unhurried, thorough. And I need you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this story. I did not cancel those cards out of spite. I did not cancel them because I was angry or bitter or trying to make a point. I canceled them because 3 days earlier, my mother had sat across from me in her living room with a plate of shortbread cookies between us that neither of us touched. And she told me in the gentlest possible voice that she had updated her will. That the house was going to Roy, that the savings were going to Roy, that everything, all of it, was going to Roy, because Roy needed it more, because I had always landed on my feet, because I was the strong one. I need to take you back to the beginning, because the beginning is the only place this makes any sense at all. I grew up in Bowling Green, Kentucky, middle child of 5. My dad, Gerald, drove long-haul trucks and was home maybe 10 days out of every 30. My mom, Patsy, worked the early shift at the hospital laundry and came home every day smelling like industrial detergent and wearing the face of a woman who had used up everything she had before noon. We were not poor in a dramatic way. We were poor in the way that means you never quite run out of food, but you also never stop thinking about it. Roy was the oldest, the firstborn son. He got taken to truck yards on the weekends and had his achievements announced to the neighbors and was given the benefit of every doubt our parents had to offer. I don't say this bitterly. I say it because it is simply what happened. Roy was loved loudly in a house where love was mostly quiet, and the rest of us learned to make do with the quieter version. My job, from the time I was old enough to understand it was my job, was to hold things together. Not asked, not assigned, just understood. When my dad's truck broke down in Tennessee and there was no money to fix it and the rent was due, I was 11 years old, and I organized a bake sale at school and collected $74 and handed it to my mother in a paper bag. She took it. She said nothing. She never mentioned it again. And I told myself that was fine. That was just how things worked. That the contribution was enough, even if nobody acknowledged it. I have been telling myself that for 32 years. And here's the thing. If you have ever been in a family like mine, you already know exactly what I mean. You know what it feels like to be the reliable one, the capable one, the one who gets quietly handed the problem because everyone knows you'll solve it and won't make a fuss about it afterward. If that hit something in you just now, I want you to go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. because I promise you, this story is just getting started. Now let me keep going. I put myself through Western Kentucky University on a partial scholarship and 2 part-time jobs, one at a coffee shop on campus, one waitressing 4 nights a week. I studied accounting because I was good with numbers and because I understood at 19 that financial literacy was the only form of armor available to me. I graduated in 4 years, no debt. My parents did not come to the ceremony. My dad had a run to make. My mom said she wasn't feeling well. Roy was the one who sent a text that said, "Congrats," with a thumbs up emoji, which at the time I found charming. I built my career the slow, steady way. No shortcuts, no one opening doors for me. I worked for a payroll company for 6 years, then moved to Hartwell Industrial Supply as a financial analyst, worked my way to senior, and have been trusted with every sensitive number in that building for the past 4 years. I bought my house at 38, a 3-bedroom brick place on a quiet street, and I paid it off in 5 years by throwing every extra dollar at the principal. The day the mortgage was paid off, I bought myself a gold watch, just a simple one, nothing flashy. I put it on my wrist and I sat at my kitchen table and I said out loud to nobody, "You did that." That was the most celebration I got. Because here's the thing about being reliable. When you succeed, people nod. They say, "Oh, that's great, Deanna," in the same tone they use to confirm an appointment. The success of someone who is always going to succeed doesn't require much ceremony. The ceremony is reserved for the person who struggled, who needed help, who fell and had to be picked back up. And in my family, that person was Roy. 6 years ago, Roy called me on a Thursday evening, and he was rattled in a way I hadn't heard from him in a long time. The transmission on his work truck had failed in the middle of a job. He had a subcontract he was about to lose. He didn't ask me for money. Roy never asked directly. That wasn't his style. He just described the situation and paused. And I knew what the pause meant. I had known what that pause meant my whole life. I opened 2 credit cards in my name, added Roy as an authorized user, told myself it was temporary, a bridge. 6 weeks, maybe 2 months. Within 8 months, the cards were being used for groceries, for the kids' school supplies, for a car repair that nobody mentioned to me until I saw the charge, for gas, for utility deposits, for Christmas, for things I was never told about because on some level, everyone involved understood that if I didn't know the specifics, I couldn't object to them. I paid the minimums, then more than the minimums, month after month after month. I kept a spreadsheet. I always keep a spreadsheet. It's what I do. In 6 years, I paid $31,480 of Roy's life, and 3 days before I canceled those cards, my mother sat in her living room and told me that Roy needed the inheritance more than I did. Because I was capable, because I had always been fine. She was not wrong that I was capable. She had made sure of that by never letting me be anything else. I drove home from her house that Saturday with 2 bags of her groceries still in my backseat. Oatmeal, the kind with the individual packets, her brand since 1987. And I sat in my driveway for a while before I went inside. Not crying, just sitting. I went in, put the groceries on the counter, and opened my laptop. I pulled up the spreadsheet. I looked at the number. $31,480. Then I closed the laptop, made tea, and watched television for the rest of the night. 3 episodes of something I cannot remember now. I made my decision somewhere in the middle of the 2nd episode. I didn't feel it as a decision. I felt it the way you feel a door clicking shut. Quiet, final, completely without drama. Tuesday morning, 7:14 a.m. 2 taps. Confirm, confirm. And then I went to my forecasting meeting. Roy's first voicemail was confused. That was the word for it. Confused, not angry, not yet. He said something like, "Hey Dee, so I think there might be an issue with one of the cards. Cheryl tried to use it this morning and it got declined. So if you could just, call me back when you get a chance." Casual. Like he was reporting a minor technical glitch. Like the card had simply malfunctioned and I would fix it the way I always fix things, quietly and without requiring any acknowledgement. The second voicemail came 12 minutes later. By then, he had figured out it wasn't a technical glitch. His voice had a quality in that second message that I recognized immediately. Not because I had heard it directed at me before, but because I had heard it directed at the world my entire childhood. It was the sound Roy made when something he expected to have was suddenly not available to him. A low, tight irritation that hadn't quite decided yet whether to become something louder. He said, "Deanna, both cards are showing closed. I need you to call me." Not what happened. Not are you okay? Just, I need you to call me. As if the sequence of events was still, even now, about what Roy needed. I listened to both messages on my lunch break, sitting in my car in the parking lot behind Hartwell, with a turkey sandwich I had made that morning. I listened to my mother's message too. "Deanna, please call me. Roy is very upset. He says the cards aren't working." A pause. Then, "I don't understand what's happening, honey." I sat with that for a moment. The sandwich. The October light coming flat and pale through the windshield. My mother's voice saying, "I don't understand," in the tone she had always used when what she meant was, "Please make this easier for everyone." I finished my sandwich. I went back inside. I had vendor reconciliations to finish before 4 o'clock. What I did not do, what I want to be clear about, is feel nothing. I want to be careful here because it would be easy to tell this story in a way that makes me sound untouchable, surgical, like someone who processed an injury and responded with cold precision and felt fine the whole time. That is not what happened. What happened is that I felt quite a lot. I just felt it in the order I chose, on the schedule I chose, in the privacy of my own kitchen and my own car and my own chest, where nobody else had access to it. I think about that now, about how many years I spent feeling things in secret, not because I was ashamed of them, but because I had learned early that visible emotion in my family was a resource that got used. If you cried, someone handed you a reason you were overreacting. If you were hurt, someone found a way to make your hurt into evidence of your instability. So I learned to process quietly, to feel things completely and then fold them away and function. I had decades of practice. What I didn't expect was the silence from certain people. Not Roy. I expected Roy to be loud. Not my mother. I expected my mother to smooth. What I didn't expect was Kevin, My brother Kevin, who was 41 and had spent most of his adult life positioned carefully in the neutral middle of every family conflict, who had an opinion about nothing and attended every holiday and said, "That's tough," to both sides of every argument simultaneously. Kevin went quiet in a way that had weight to it. He didn't call me to take Roy's side. He didn't call me to take mine. He just didn't call. And somehow that particular silence was the one that sat in my stomach for days. Tamra called from Nashville on a Wednesday night, which I had not expected either. She was the youngest, 36, the one who had gotten out earliest and maintained the least contact. And when I saw her name on my screen, I almost didn't answer because I wasn't sure I had the energy for another version of, "What did you do, Deanna?" But what she said was, "I heard." And then she laughed. Not meanly, just the tired laugh of someone who had seen something coming for a long time and didn't take any pleasure in being right. "I heard, and honestly, good for you. How are you doing?" Nobody in my family had asked me that in a while. How are you doing? Not, what are you going to do? Not, can you fix this? Not, please call Roy back. Just, how are you? I told her I was okay. I meant it. Mostly. The thing about cutting off a financial support that people didn't know you were providing is that the fallout has a strange quality to it. Roy was angry, genuinely angry. But the anger had nowhere clean to land because the argument he wanted to make, "You can't just cut us off," required him to acknowledge that he had been receiving something. And acknowledging that meant acknowledging what it was and where it came from and how long it had been happening. So instead, the anger kept slipping sideways. It became about the will. It became about me being bitter. It became about me punishing the family for my mother's decision, which was her right to make, and who was I to respond to a legal document with something so petty? I heard all of this secondhand through Tamra, who heard it from Kevin, who heard it from Cheryl. The family telephone had always worked better in one direction. And here's the part that I keep coming back to. Here's what I want to ask you, because I genuinely want to know. Have you ever been someone's emergency contact? Financially, emotionally, practically, without ever being told that's what you were? Have you ever realized that you had been quietly subsidizing someone's life for years, and that the subsidy had become so normalized that stopping it felt to them like an act of aggression? Drop that in the comments, because I read every single one, and I have a feeling I'm not the only one who has sat in a parking lot on a lunch break listening to voicemails from people who are angry that the floor finally stopped holding them up. The week after I closed the accounts, I went home each evening and I did what I always do when I'm overwhelmed. I organized. I cleaned out the junk drawer in my kitchen, the one that had been accumulating since I moved in, rubber bands and dead batteries and takeout menus from restaurants that had closed. I reorganized my pantry by expiration date. I balanced a spreadsheet I had already balanced. Small systems, contained systems, things I could actually control. And slowly, underneath the noise of Roy's calls and my mother's gentle, bewildered messages, and the sideways reports from Tamra, something began to clarify. Not a plan exactly, more like a posture, a way of standing in the situation that felt, for the first time in a very long time, like mine. I had spent 6 years paying for a life that was not mine. I had spent 43 years being the capable one, the reliable one, the one who could handle it. I had never once been asked if I wanted that job. I had simply been assigned it at an age when I didn't know I could decline. And the thing about jobs you never agreed to take is that you can always, eventually, resign. The spreadsheet stayed open on my laptop most of that week. Not because I was dwelling on the number, $31,480, but because there was something clarifying about looking at it, about seeing 6 years rendered in rows and columns, about watching the math tell the story more cleanly and more honestly than anyone in my family ever had. I had a conversation with my attorney, Linda, on a Thursday afternoon. She confirmed what I already knew, that my liability on both accounts ended the moment I closed them, that Roy had no legal claim, that the money I had already spent was simply gone in the way that spent money is always simply gone. She said it matter-of-factly, the way she said everything, and then she said, "Deanna, for what it's worth, you did this exactly right." I wrote that down. Not because I needed the validation, but because it was the first time in 10 days that anyone had said something to me that was specifically, directly, unambiguously about me. I drove home that evening past my mother's street without turning. Past the Kroger where I had been picking up her groceries every other Saturday for 4 years. Past the hardware store where I had bought the weather stripping for her back door last November because she mentioned it was letting in a draft, and I had just gone and bought it, the way I always just went and did the thing. I kept driving. I got home, changed out of my work clothes, and made dinner. Something real, not a frozen thing, not cereal. I made pasta with the good olive oil and a glass of wine I poured for myself and nobody else. I sat at my kitchen table in the quiet of my paid-off house and I ate. And for the first time in a long time, the quiet felt like mine. 11 days after I canceled the cards, Roy showed up at my house. It was a Sunday afternoon, the kind of flat, gray October Sunday that feels like the world is taking a breath and not quite releasing it. I was in the kitchen when I heard the truck in the driveway, that particular engine sound, the way it always knocked a little on the left side, the way it had knocked for 2 years because Roy kept meaning to get it looked at. I knew it was him before I got to the window. I stood in the kitchen for a moment, not hiding, just deciding. Then I walked to the front door and opened it. He was standing on my porch in the gray Carhartt pants and the faded blue Henley, and he looked, I want to be precise about this. He looked like a man who had rehearsed something and was already losing confidence in it. He was bigger than the doorway in the physical sense, the way he had always been, that broad-shouldered presence that had read as authority our whole lives. But there was something different about how he was carrying it, something that had gone uncertain around the edges. He started talking before I said anything. That was always Roy's way. Fill the silence before it can fill you. He said the cards were affecting everything. He said Cheryl couldn't cover the grocery gap on her income alone. He said the kids didn't understand why things were different, and he didn't know what to tell them. He said I was punishing the whole family for our mother's decision, and our mother was 71 years old. And was this really how I wanted to do things? He said, you did this to hurt us. You did this because you're bitter about the will. And I let that sit there. I didn't rush to fill it. I didn't argue with it. I just let it exist in the air between us for long enough that it started to sound, even to him, like what it was. A man explaining away an inconvenient truth by making it about someone else's feelings. Then I said, Roy, I have paid $31,480 of your credit card bills over 6 years. He opened his mouth. I kept going. I did not do it because you asked me to. I did it because that is what I do. And I am done doing it. I paused. The will is mom's right. The cards were my choice, and I've made a different one. He said, you should have told me. We depended on you. And I said, without heat, without any drama at all, in the same voice I used to read a figure off a quarterly report, I know you did. Then I closed the door. Not slammed, not a statement, just closed. The latch clicked the way it always clicked, the same small sound it made every night when I came home from work. And I stood on my side of it in my socks on my hardwood floor, and I listened to Roy stand on his side of it for a moment before I heard his boots on the porch steps, and then the truck door, and then that knocking engine pulling back down my street. I went to the kitchen. I finished what I had been making before he arrived. I did not call anyone. And that moment, the click of that latch, I think that is the moment this whole story turned on. Not the cards, not the spreadsheet, not even my mother's living room with the untouched shortbread. It was that sound. That small, ordinary, completely undramatic sound of a door simply closing. If that landed somewhere in you just now, if you felt something you're not quite sure how to name, hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already, because what I felt standing on that side of the door is something I want to keep telling you about. And it gets quieter from here, but quieter is not the same as smaller. The days after Roy's visit had a different texture than the days before it. Before, there had been noise, the calls, the voicemails, the secondhand reports filtering through Tamra. After, there was a stillness that I initially mistook for the eye of something. I kept waiting for the next thing to arrive, the certified letter, the family ultimatum, my mother appearing on my porch with her reading glasses on a chain and her soft, disappointed expression. None of that came. What came instead, about 2 weeks later, was a call from Kevin. Kevin, who had gone quiet in a way that had weight. Kevin, who had spent 41 years carefully positioned in the middle of everything with no fingerprints on anything. Kevin called on a Tuesday evening, and I almost let it go to voicemail out of habit, but something made me answer. Maybe I was tired of letting things go. Maybe I was just curious. He didn't explain why he was calling. He didn't preamble. He said, I just want you to know I see what you did. Not the cards part. I mean all of it. All the years of it. A pause. I should have said something a long time ago. I don't really have an excuse for that. I sat down at my kitchen table. I wasn't expecting that. I wasn't expecting something that specific, that undefended. I said, thank you, Kevin. He said, yeah. And that was most of it, actually. We talked for another few minutes about nothing in particular, his job, the weather, a restaurant in Bowling Green that had apparently closed, and then we hung up. But I sat at that table for a while after, because I see what you did, all the years of it. Those words did something to me that $31,000 of acknowledged debt could not have done. It wasn't about the money. It was never really about the money. It was about being seen. I had been moving through my family for 43 years like a load-bearing wall, essential to the structure, invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. Kevin had looked. Not soon enough, not loudly enough, but he had looked. And something about that phone call settled into a place in me that had been unsettled for weeks. Tamara called the following Sunday. We talked for an hour and a half, which was longer than we had talked in years, maybe longer than we had ever talked. And somewhere in the middle of it, she said, "Come to Nashville for Christmas, just you. We'll do whatever we want and answer no one." I said yes before she finished the sentence. My mother called twice more in the weeks that followed. Not to apologize. I want to be honest about that because this is not a story that ends with my mother having a revelation. She called the first time to ask if I could help with Roy's kids at Christmas. I declined gently and completely. She called the second time to tell me she loved me and that she hoped I wasn't angry. And I told her I wasn't angry. That was true. What I was finished carrying a weight that had never been mine to carry. And those are not the same thing at all. What I kept thinking about in those quiet evenings in my paid-off house was not what my family had done to me. I had understood what my family was doing to me for years. I had just been choosing over and over to absorb it rather than name it. What I kept thinking about was why I had kept opening accounts and buying groceries and fixing back doors and showing up with paper bags of oatmeal for a family that loved me in the way people love a utility, reliably, without much thought, and with a low-grade panic when it stops working. And the answer, when I let myself look at it directly, was something I had known since I was 11 years old, handing my mother $74 in a paper bag. I had believed, without ever stating it, that my value to the people around me was contingent on my usefulness to them, that love had to be earned through function, that I was not the kind of person who got chosen. I was the kind of person who got needed. And I had confused those two things for so long that I had stopped being able to feel the difference. Cheryl reached out once, not a call, a text. It said, "I know this isn't something I can fix. I just want you to know I'm not proud of how things went. I hope you're okay." It was the most honest thing anyone in that family had said to me in months, possibly years. I read it 3 times. I wrote back, "I appreciate that. Take care of yourself and those kids." I meant both sentences. The night before I drove to Nashville for Christmas, I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of wine and my laptop, and I opened the spreadsheet one last time. I looked at the number. $31,480. 6 years, 2 credit cards, rows and rows of months. And then I closed it. Not deleted, just closed. Filed away in a folder I didn't need to have open anymore. I thought about Roy, not with anger, with something more complicated and more honest than anger. I thought about him at 18, getting a football scholarship and losing it within a year, and coming home to a family that had already told him he was the one who was going to make it. I thought about what it does to a person to fail the role they were handed before they were old enough to choose it. I thought about how he had been given so much expectation and so little preparation, and how he had spent 25 years filling the gap between those two things with other people's resources and a self-story about deserving more. I did not feel sorry for him in the way that excuses things, but I felt something, a kind of recognition. We had both been handed roles in that family that we didn't choose. His had given him everything and prepared him for nothing. Mine had given me nothing and prepared me for everything. Neither of us had picked well. The consequences came the way consequences usually come, not in a dramatic rush, but in a slow, unglamorous unfolding that nobody choreographed and nobody could have stopped. Tamara was my source for most of it, not because she was gossiping, but because she was honest and because she understood that I needed to know without needing to be involved. She called every week or so, a habit we had built in the months since the cards, something that had grown from one surprised phone call into something real and consistent and ours. She would tell me what she heard and I would listen, and we would both sit with it for a moment before moving on to talking about her job or my job or a book one of us was reading. Roy and Cheryl had gone through a hard stretch. Not catastrophic. They had not lost the house. The kids were fed and in school, but the kind of hard that reveals what a structure is actually made of when the extra support is removed. Cheryl had picked up more hours at the dental office. Roy had taken a winter job doing deliveries for a logistics company, which was steady and paid decently and was, by all accounts, the most financially consistent thing he had done in years. Tamara said it carefully and without satisfaction. He's actually showing up, like every day. He's showing up. I sat with that. Not with pleasure, not with resentment, with something closer to neutrality. The kind that comes not from not caring, but from having finally stopped paying for the outcome either way. The thing about a small city like Bowling Green is that information moves, not maliciously necessarily, just the way water moves through a landscape, finding all the available paths. People knew something had shifted in the Maddox family. They didn't know the specifics, but they knew the shape of it. My mother's neighbor, a woman named Doris, who had attended the same church as Patsy for 30 years, apparently asked my mother at a Tuesday potluck whether Deanna was doing all right. And my mother had said, yes, fine, everything was fine, in the tone that Doris, who had known Patsy for 30 years, recognized immediately as the tone of a woman who was not going to discuss it, but who was also not entirely at peace. Tamara told me this and I laughed, not unkindly, just the small laugh of someone who has stopped needing a narrative to be neat. My mother and I talked, not often, not with the ease we had never actually had, but we talked. She called on Sunday evenings sometimes, and I answered, and we discussed her neighbor's hip replacement and the price of heating oil and whether the church was going to repaint the fellowship hall. We did not discuss the will. We did not discuss Roy. We existed in the careful, limited space of two people who love each other in the only way currently available to them, which is not a perfect way, but is not nothing either. I did not push her to say what she should have said. I did not wait for it. I had spent too many years waiting for acknowledgments that were never coming. And I had finally understood that the waiting itself was a choice, one I had been making without realizing I was making it. About 3 months after Christmas, Kevin called again. This time, he had something specific to say. He said, "I talked to Roy." A pause. "I told him what you paid, the actual number." Another pause. "He didn't know, Dee. I mean, he knew in the way people know things they've decided not to look at directly. But he didn't know the number." I was quiet for a moment. Kevin said, "He didn't say much, but he went quiet in a way I haven't seen from him before. I just thought you should know." I thanked Kevin. I meant it. And after we hung up, I sat in my kitchen and thought about Roy going quiet. Roy, who had never in my memory run out of things to say, going quiet at a number, $31,480. 6 years of monthly payments rendered in one sentence by the brother who had been standing in the middle with no fingerprints on anything, finally choosing a moment to put his hand on something real. I did not call Roy. I did not wait for him to call me. What happened between Roy and whatever version of himself he was meeting at that number was his work to do, not mine. I had done my accounting. He could do his. Spring came the way spring comes in Kentucky, sudden and generous, green arriving almost overnight after months of gray. I started taking longer walks in the evenings, out past my street and through the neighborhood that backed up against a small creek. And I started noticing things I had been walking past without seeing. The way the light hit the water, the specific sound of the creek when it was running fast after rain versus slow in dry weather. The neighbor's dog, a black lab named something I never caught, who waited at the fence every evening and seemed personally invested in whether I came by. It was on one of those walks in the early part of April that I decided to write the letter, not to Roy, not to my mother, to myself, in the way that is really to no one and everyone simultaneously. The kind of writing you do not because you intend to send it, but because some things need to exist outside your own head before you can stop carrying them. I sat at my kitchen table. I do most of the things that matter to me at that kitchen table, and I wrote it out longhand in a notebook I had bought for work and never used. I wrote about the bake sale. I wrote about the scholarship ceremony my parents didn't attend. I wrote about the 2 credit cards and the 6 years and the number. I wrote about my mother's living room and the shortbread cookies and the word capable and what it means to be told you are capable by someone who is using your capability as a reason to give you less. And then I wrote the thing I had been working my way toward for 43 years. I wrote it in one sentence, and when I put the pen down, I read it back, and it was exactly right. I spent my whole life being the person this family could count on, and I have finally decided to be the person I can count on. That was it. That was the whole philosophy. Not profound, probably, to anyone else, but to me, it was the difference between the life I had been living and the life I was choosing. I called Tamara that night and read it to her over the phone. There was a pause, and then she said very quietly, "Yeah, that's it. That's exactly it." She didn't need to say anything more than that. And she didn't. She was quiet on the line for a moment, and then she said, "I'm really glad you came for Christmas, Dee." And I said, "Me too." I think about what I would tell the version of myself who was standing in that Kroger aisle in October, reading my mother's text with a bag of oatmeal over one arm, already knowing what I was about to hear. I would not tell her to be ready. She was already ready. She just didn't know it yet. I would tell her that the door she is about to close has needed closing for 30 years, and that the sound it makes when it finally shuts is going to be the quietest, most ordinary sound she has ever heard, and it is going to be enough. I went back to the farmer's market. It had been a thing I did alone on Saturday mornings. one of the small pleasures of my life that I had let become irregular during the months of noise and fallout. I went back on a Saturday in May. I bought bread from the same woman I had been buying bread from for 4 years, who recognized me and said, "Been a while?" And I said, "It has." And she handed me the sourdough wrapped in paper, and I put it under my arm and walked through the rest of the market in the mild morning light. I bought tomatoes. I bought a small pot of herbs I had no real plan for. I bought a jar of local honey because it caught the light on the table in a way that pleased me, and that was enough of a reason. I drove home. I put the bread on the counter and the herbs on the windowsill and the honey in the cabinet where it would last for months. And I stood in my kitchen in the May light and I was, this is the only word that fits, settled. Not happy in a performed way, not at peace in a resolved way, just settled. In my body, in my house, in my life. My name is Deanna Whitfield. I am 43 years old. I paid $31,000 for the privilege of being overlooked. And then I stopped. And the stopping, the quiet, undramatic, completely ordinary act of stopping turned out to be the most important thing I have ever done for myself. Not because of what it cost them, but because of what it gave back to me. Before I go, I want to ask you something. Because this story has been sitting with me for months, and I think it is really a story about one thing underneath everything else. About how long we can fund lives that diminish our own before we recognize what we are actually paying for. So I want to know, have you ever been the capable one, the reliable one, the one everyone called because they knew you would answer and handle it and not make it difficult afterward? And if you have, did you choose that? Or did someone just hand you that role so early you forgot you had the option to put it down? Leave it in the comments. I read every single one, and I mean that. And if this story stayed with you, if something in it landed somewhere real, hit that like button, subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and share it with someone who might need to hear that stopping is not the same as failing, that closing a door is not the same as giving up, that being the strong one does not mean being the one who absorbs everything forever. Take care of yourselves. I'll see you in the next one.